So, seeing as people loved my video on, how to be a better debater, seeing as I'm imbuing to the masses, better debate tactics, how to improve as a debater, how to actually improve and be one with your debate sensei, Today we'll be explaining how to counter jargon warriors and several other things. So, first of all, a jargon warrior, to as a brief definition, is just somebody who uses overly complex, overly verbose words, which usually have nothing to do with the topic, in an attempt to just overwhelm your opponent and just basically try and confuse them with the jargon that you're saying. And usually the telltale sign for a jargon warrior is one day if you ask them to define the words they're talking about, they'll usually try and say something like, "Why do you not know why this basic stuff?" And they'll pull the infinity and be like, "This is basic, my N word. This is basic." But literally, the best way to counter a jargon warrior is quite literally just one, ask them to explain what they're saying, and instead of actually inserting the jargon, ask them to insert something that the average layman will be able to understand. Now you'll notice people who generally actually know what they're talking about actually are able to explain what they're talking about in simple terms in which even the average layman will be able to understand. See Lance Bush, for example. He is able to explain to the average layman about about meta ethics. So it seems as if, that people, the jargon warriors, I should say, they have this issue because they don't understand what they're talking about. So that's one. And then two, then you can also ask them, "Okay, jargon warrior, sir, can you please explain to me the term that you're using?" And usually what you want to do is actually ask them to give, some sort of agreed upon definition for that, some sort of like site. For example, usually whenever a jargon warrior gives you a definition, usually what they're talking about isn't actually like how the SCP defines it. Usually isn't how even most philosophers, even most regular people define the word. So again, usually a jargon warrior just is using definitions in an extremely proprietary sense, and even though that can be to their, to their benefit on occasion, we're trying to learn how to counter them. So that's a perfect way to counter them. So those two strategies is like one of the easiest stuff to do. And one of the other people you need to avoid, and also you need to learn how to counter, is a spurg. Now see, spurgs, I thought they only existed in the fiction community. However, it seems as if they exist everywhere. Now a spurg, you notice this is the base version of a spurg. So a base version of the spurg is somebody who swears a lot. Not only do they swear a lot, but they also just they don't have much substance. So again, swearing isn't an essential property because people swear a lot and still have loads of substance. But a spurg will be someone who spurgs and has no substance. So take Dead Boy, for example. Dead Boy spurgs and has no substance. Or take Batsu even. Batsu spurgs, and from what I've heard, Batsu has no substance. So again, that's a usual telltale sign for a spurg. Now, you'll notice that the average spurg, usually, they won't actually agree to moderation. Now, the reason why is because agreeing to moderation basically culls the entire debate style. It stops them from actually being able to overtalk. It stops them from actually being able to, overwhelm their so-called, overwhelm, their opponent by virtue of just like talking over them, But because they lack this possibility, what they'll say, and these are the smarter spurgs. So, this is what Baotsu would do. So, Baotsu will say that, "Oh yeah, no. I'm not trying to overtalk you. I'm just healthily interjecting." Now, keep in mind, what a spurg means by a healthy interjection compared to what you mean by healthy interjection would be completely different. So, a healthy interjection would be, "Oh, well, you said X was my argument, but X isn't actually my argument. So let me say this, then you can refute it." But a regular spurg, right, would just say like, what a regular spurg would say, a healthy interjection is, "Oh, let me cut you off because you said something I disagree with, and then let me make a whole new argument while you're in the middle of your sentence." Now, that is actually a healthy interjection to them. So what you don't want to do is actually let these guys slide past you, slither away like the snakes that they are, by disguising what they're doing as healthy interjection. Now, a third example of a spurg is Archimedes. Now, Archimedes, he's been able to hide his spurg tendencies. Now, the way in spurg, like Archie, hides his spurg tendencies is one, by simply just, pretending to know what he's talking about. So I asked Archie, "Yo, Archie, what's the friggin' Geach problem supposed to prove?" And he said expressivism. Now, this is just supposed to show that usually these spurgs, they don't actually know what they're talking about. So in the case of Archie, he will initially, he's like a snake, he shed their skin really quickly. So initially in Archie's case, right, initially he'll be trying to be cordial, he'll be pretending like he knows what he's talking about. Usually you'll see him, he will mix in a bit of the jargon warrior, so he'll be mixing in this type of stuff, he'll be pretending as if he knows what he's talking about. But then as he begins to lose on substance, you see him steadily getting angrier and angrier. Now, the reason why he'd be getting angry and angrier is simply because, one, he knows he's losing substantively. So if you ask for a moderator so that he doesn't keep getting angry, he's going to say no. Then you also notice that he begins to yell more. His mic begins to get louder slowly but surely. Now, as you all have noticed, whenever Archie's on PC, Archie doesn't lose polls, but whenever he's on phone, he does. So it seems as if the only relevant distinction is actually his argumentation, or his quote-unquote rhetoric to most of these people, rather than the actual arguments he's saying. So what you want to do is actually get this bug, and actually you need a competent moderator, because not only does he have like most of the stuff on a leash, but yeah, you need moderators you can trust. So the second thing is, of course, to actually improve, first of all, you need to learn how to make a valid argument. See, if you're in the fiction community, then probably you actually won't need a valid argument, right? Or you won't actually need to be formalizing your arguments very often, seeing as most of the fiction community are too stupid to actually point out and actually ask about why. So again, we'll get into the valid argument stuff later, but we can actually talk about how to spot a fallacy. This is one of the main things you need across both communities, and most people don't actually know the distinction between a formal fallacy and an informal fallacy. So a formal fallacy, quite clearly, okay, anyways, I don't know why I said that, but a formal fallacy just deals with the structure of an argument. It deals with how the argument is formed, right? It deals with stuff like, maybe the way that their community, or the way that they're communicating the argument, is in a way that, it isn't formed properly. So again, most of the time, a formal fallacy and an invalid argument, you'll notice that like you're able to point out multiple pieces of formal fallacies within an invalid argument all of the time, seeing as not only would they be likely making an invalid inference, but multiple other stuff, here and there. But in the fiction community, which is the variety, like a large majority of my audience, right? In the fiction community, what you actually need to focus on are informal fallacies. You see, most of the time, informal fallacies will be what's said within the debate. So we have ad homs, right? We have like things like that. So informal arguments deal with the actual content of the argument and explain why it's false. So again, these are actually the things you want to focus on. See, most people actually will consider you to be pretentious if you start looking for valid arguments like every single turn. So a way to actually keep your general perception while also winning the debate is by pointing out more informal fallacies than formal fallacies, seeing as people actually care about what the argument is trying to portray rather than the structure of the argument. Now, most people don't know the distinction between a valid argument and a sound argument. A valid argument is just if all of the premises are true, then the conclusion is necessarily true. It's like very, very obvious. It isn't something hard to understand. Right? So if P then Q, P therefore Q. If all of these premises are true, the conclusion literally cannot be false. There's no possible world in which it's false. And a sound argument is not only a valid argument, but also all of these premises actually correspond to reality. So I can say, if a cat exists, then it has fur. A cat exists, therefore it has fur, right? That is an argument that is actually sound and valid, right? Now, I mean, you can contest that if you want, but again, for the sake of the hypothetical, that's a sound and valid argument. Whereas saying, if cats exist, then whales are Jewish, therefore cats exist, right? That's not only is it valid, but it's also sound, seeing as, again, of course, there's no actual direct correlation between the two of them, right? Even if there was a correlation, then I don't think there's a whole bunch of stuff that I need to explain. Maybe I'm a bad teacher, but you should get the entire gist of the argument. But yeah, people actually struggle to make those regularly, and I recommend before you actually look into making your argument super valid and stuff, you should actually try and be able to see if you can communicate your argument in natural language. So if you're able to communicate your argument in natural language, then most of the time they won't actually need any, you won't actually need any sort of validity checking, specifically because there won't be anything that's unclear there, right? So literally, if you're able to portray your argument in a valid manner, then you're actually going to notice that you're able to, or I should say, you're able to portray it in a valid and coherent manner in natural language. Most people won't ask you for actual formalization. You'll notice that even Mason, Brendan Avat, the guy who's always asking around, what's the inference rule? Notice how he doesn't do that against Arianos, and the reason why is because both of them understand what each other are talking about. Both of them are actually unclear on the terms used most of the time. Actually, rather, they have some a disagreement that's external to the validity and the structure of the argument. So once you get the natural language down, then the formalization comes after. The formalization is only, It's only just a last resort if the person doesn't want, if the person doesn't understand the natural language, or the person could just be being pretentious, and just, not want to hear it in natural language. Now, another thing is how to improve your rhetoric. See, I have different rhetoric than you. You have different rhetoric from the person next to you. Everyone has different rhetoric. Everyone has different ways in which they attempt to convince someone. So, again, one of the main parts of rhetoric is substance. So, again, if you're saying things that are really stupid, no matter how loud you say them, of course, it just shows your inability to argue, rather just your ability to scream and shout. So again, you won't want to focus on how loud you can yell. What you're going to want to focus on is not only the tone of your voice, but also when to get aggressive, when to be passive, and also how to actually time yourself whenever you speak. So for example, I could be speaking like this and actually trying to get as many words out as fast as possible, but you realize that actually you're unable to actually understand me as well as you regularly should be able to. So regularly, if you want to improve the tone of your voice and how fast or slow you're speaking, I recommend just recording an audio clip of yourself speaking and then listening to it over and over again to see, whether or not you like the tone of your voice and how fast you're speaking. This has been Shinra. That's all I have for today's lesson, and I'm out.